My name is Evelyn Carter, a 67-year-old woman who thought she'd already faced every sorrow life could bring, until one storm changed everything. When the tornado tore my home apart, I thought I'd lost it all: my house, my memories, even my son's love. But sometimes, life destroys things only to lead us where we were meant to be. Mine led me back to the man I once loved and the peace I never thought I'd find again. Welcome to Granny's Stories Vault, where you'll find a new emotional, real, and heart-touching story every day. Now, let's get to my story. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I'm 67 years old. I've spent most of my life in a quiet little town called Meadowbrook, a place where the loudest sound was usually the church bell on Sunday mornings. I used to think that after losing my husband, Henry, to a sudden heart attack 8 years ago, there wasn't much left in this world that could break me again. I was wrong. That Tuesday afternoon started like any other calm, almost routine. I made my tea at exactly 3 o'clock, as I always did, and sat by the window with the same floral cup I'd used for years. The sky was heavy that day, almost bruised-looking, like it was holding something back. The local radio mumbled about a possible storm system, but in our part of Illinois, storms were as common as gossip. You pay attention, but you don't panic. Then the siren wailed, that long, trembling cry that can make even the bravest heart skip a beat. "Tornado warning. Take shelter immediately," the announcer's voice crackled. I remember my hands shaking as I rushed through the house. My house, the one Henry and I built together from the ground up. I grabbed what I could fit into a small suitcase: our wedding album, his old wristwatch, my mother's quilt, and a folder of insurance papers. 40 years of living, reduced to what I could carry in one trembling hand. I ran to the basement, clutching Henry's old wool sweater like it could somehow protect me. Then came the sound, the roar that people always compare to a train. But this wasn't a train. This was the sound of the earth tearing itself apart. My ears popped, the ground trembled, and all I could do was curl up in the corner, whispering, "Please, please let it pass." And then silence. Not peace, not relief, just that hollow, dreadful quiet that only comes after everything's gone wrong. When I finally pushed open the basement door, I didn't recognize my world anymore. My kitchen table gone, my roof gone, my rose garden shredded into a mess of broken stems and brown mud. It felt like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. I cried for the first time in years, standing in the ruins of the life Henry and I had built. My neighbors ran from house to house, calling names, counting blessings, but everyone was broken in some way. The Red Cross talked about temporary shelters, but I couldn't bring myself to go. Sleeping in a crowded gymnasium surrounded by strangers? No, I needed something else. I needed family. So I borrowed a phone from a neighbor and called my son. "Aaron, it's Mom," I whispered, my voice shaking. "The storm, it took everything. My house is gone." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, finally, his voice steady, distant. "Are you okay, Mom? Do you need me to send money?" I just need a place to stay for a while," I said softly, "until I figure things out." He hesitated again before saying, "All right, come to the city. We'll make space." I hung up, not realizing that the storm I'd just survived was nothing compared to the one waiting for me in his home. The next morning, with my suitcase and a few trash bags of what little I had left, I drove north toward Chicago. The sun was shining as if nothing had happened. I remember thinking how cruel it felt for the world to look so normal when mine was in ruins. I told myself it would be temporary, just until the insurance came through, just until I found my footing. I had no idea that this was the beginning of something far greater than loss, because sometimes the storm doesn't end when the winds stop. Sometimes it follows you quietly, wearing the face of someone you love. What awaited me in the city wasn't the comfort of family. It was a heartbreak deeper than any storm could bring. The drive to Chicago felt endless. My old sedan rattled with every gust of wind, its dashboard lights flickering like nervous eyes. The air still smelled faintly of wet earth and plaster, a cruel reminder of what I'd lost. I told myself over and over, "It's just for a little while, Evelyn, just until things settle." When I finally reached Aaron's neighborhood, my heart sank. He lived in Riverside Heights, one of those sleek parts of the city where everything glimmered: glass towers, polished stone, and people who looked like they'd never known a bad day in their lives. My car looked like a relic from another world. The doorman at his building glanced at me the way people do when they're trying not to stare. My luggage was a pile of old suitcases and trash bags tied with twine, everything that survived the tornado. He handed me a visitor's pass like I was a stranger. I held it tightly, the plastic biting into my palm. When the elevator doors opened, Aaron was already waiting. For a moment, my heart leapt. He still had his father's eyes, that deep shade of blue that used to make me feel safe. "Mom," he said with a careful smile, the kind people use when they're trying not to show discomfort. "Aaron," I whispered, forcing a smile through trembling lips. The apartment was beautiful, high ceilings, spotless furniture, framed cityscapes on the walls. Everything gleamed. It looked like a model home, not a place where real people lived. And then I saw Emily, his wife. She walked out of the kitchen with a tablet in her hand, her silk blouse smooth and perfect. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, Mrs. Carter," she said, her tone dripping with polite pity. "I'm so sorry about your house. How awful." "Thank you," I murmured, setting my bag down gently, afraid it might dirty their perfect white rug. "It's just until the insurance comes through. I can help out around here, cook, clean, whatever you need." Aaron sat in a chair across from me, not beside me. "The thing is, Mom," he began, his voice steady but distant, "Emily and we value our privacy here. This is kind of our peaceful space." I blinked at him, certain I had misheard. "Privacy? Aaron, I lost everything yesterday. I don't need privacy. I need family." Emily leaned forward, her tone kind but controlled like she was talking to a child. "We just think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else, Mrs. Carter. There's a nice extended stay hotel just a few blocks away. It's very clean, very safe, and they have kitchenettes." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Emily," I said quietly, "how am I supposed to pay for that? The insurance money won't come for weeks." Aaron shifted in his seat, avoiding my eyes. "I can give you a few hundred to get started." A few hundred. That's what 40 years of motherhood had come down to, a few $100s and an empty promise of comfort. I stood up slowly, my knees trembling. "So that's it? Your mother doesn't belong in your sanctuary." Neither of them spoke. The silence was suffocating. I gathered my things and walked out, each step echoing louder than the last. When the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored wall, a woman small and worn, holding the remnants of a life in her arms. That night, I parked my car near a dark underpass, trying to stay invisible. The air was damp and cold. I wrapped myself in Henry's old sweater and leaned against the seat, staring at the ceiling of my car. I told myself it was only for one night. Tomorrow, Aaron would call. Tomorrow, he'd change his mind. But tomorrow came, and the phone stayed silent. I ate crackers from my purse and drank water that tasted like metal. The hum of distant traffic became my lullaby. I'd survived a tornado, but nothing hurt like being turned away by my own child. That night, as the city lights flickered through my windshield, I whispered into the dark, "Henry, if you can hear me, please tell me what to do." The wind outside howled softly in reply, almost like an answer or maybe just another storm gathering, one I couldn't yet see coming. But fate has a strange way of sending us help, sometimes from a place or a person we thought was lost forever. The drive north with Samuel felt unreal, like a dream I was afraid to wake from. The city's noise faded behind us, replaced by quiet streets lined with maple trees turning gold under the late autumn light. I stared out the window, still clutching Henry's old sweater, afraid that if I blinked, Samuel would vanish like everything else had. We finally turned onto a narrow road that led to a stone house overlooking Lake Haven. It wasn't one of those glass towers or cold modern mansions I'd seen in the city. No, this house looked alive. Built from dark timber and weathered stone, it seemed to breathe with the land itself. A wide porch wrapped around the front, lined with wind chimes that whispered in the breeze. Samuel parked the SUV and looked at me. "Welcome home, Evelyn," he said gently. "Home?" I whispered, my voice catching. He smiled. "Just for now, until you find your own again." He unloaded my 3 trash bags and dented suitcase as though they were treasures. He carried Henry's old toolbox in one hand, cradling it like it mattered. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh bread. The floors gleamed honey brown under soft afternoon light, and books filled every wall. Not glossy coffee table books, but real ones, worn, dog-eared, loved. I noticed framed photos on the mantle, community events, construction sites, people smiling beside new homes. In one picture, Samuel stood beside a sign that read Green Restoration and Development Rebuilding Lives, not just houses. I turned to him. "You built this?" He nodded. "Started small after a flood in '89. It grew bigger than I ever expected. But I kept one promise to myself, never build anything without helping someone who's lost their way." His gaze softened as it met mine. "Maybe that's why I found you again." My throat tightened. "You shouldn't have come for me, Sam. You have your life, your business. I didn't want to." He stopped me with a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Evelyn, you're not a burden, you never were. You're the unfinished chapter of my story." The tears I'd been holding back spilled over. I hadn't realized how starved I'd been for kindness. The kind that didn't pity, didn't condescend, didn't ask for anything in return. That evening, he made dinner, roasted chicken with rosemary, and a side of mashed potatoes that tasted like something out of my childhood. I hadn't had a real meal in days. When he set the plate in front of me, I could barely say thank you through the lump in my throat. Afterward, we sat by the fireplace. I stared into the flames, the warmth seeping into my skin like sunlight after a long winter. "I don't recognize myself anymore," I whispered. "I used to be strong. I don't know who this woman is now." Samuel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're still her, Evelyn. You survived. You're just tired, not broken." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the fire cracking, filling the silence with comfort instead of emptiness. When I finally stood to thank him and say goodnight, he said softly, "Stay here. As long as you need. No clock, no rules. This house has room, and maybe it's been waiting for you all along." I wanted to argue, to insist it would only be for a few days, but the words caught in my throat. For the first time since the tornado, I didn't feel like I was imposing. I felt safe. That night, I lay in a guest room with clean sheets and the sound of waves brushing the shore outside the window. As sleep pulled me under, I thought of everything I'd lost, and everything, somehow, I was beginning to find again. For the first time in weeks, I dreamed of sunlight. Days turned into weeks inside that house by the lake, but the peace I found there would soon be tested by a familiar voice from my past. Days in Samuel's house didn't feel real at first. Each morning, I woke expecting to see the gray roof beams of my ruined home, but instead, sunlight spilled across white curtains, and the faint hum of the lake greeted me. The first time I caught myself humming while making coffee, I froze. I hadn't made a sound like that since before the tornado. Samuel's house had a rhythm, a quiet peace that reminded me how to breathe again. We spent our mornings sitting on the porch, wrapped in old blankets, sipping coffee as the waves brushed the rocks below. He told me stories of the towns he helped rebuild, of single mothers, widowers, and families who'd lost everything, but somehow still found a way to start again. I listened, sometimes in silence, sometimes with tears. And bit by bit, I began to feel something I hadn't in months: purpose. Afternoons were spent in his library, surrounded by books I hadn't read in decades. I'd curl into the armchair, losing myself in stories of faraway places, while Samuel worked in his study. In the evenings, we cooked together. He'd chop vegetables while I stirred the stew, and somehow, the air in that kitchen always smelled of rosemary, hope, and home. But peace is fragile, it never lasts untouched. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when I heard my phone buzz on the counter. I almost ignored it. Very few people still called me anymore. But when I glanced at the screen, my heart stuttered. Aaron. I stared at his name for a long moment, my chest tight with a mix of longing and fear. Finally, I answered. "Mom?" His voice was cautious, careful, the same tone he used when delivering bad news. "I'm here," I said quietly. "I've been trying to reach you," he said. "Mrs. Jennings, the lady from your old neighborhood, told me your car isn't parked there anymore." "Where are you?" I hesitated, glancing at the sunlight spilling through the window. "I'm with a friend," I said. "A friend?" he repeated, the skepticism sharp in his tone. "Who exactly?" "Someone who helped me when no one else would." He was silent for a moment before replying, "Mom, I think we should talk. Emily and I have been rethinking things. Maybe you could stay with us after all. We'll make room." The words should have comforted me, but instead, they felt heavy, hollow, too late. "Where was that generosity when I was sleeping in my car, Aaron?" I said softly. "When I needed you the most?" He didn't answer. That evening, I told Samuel about the call. He listened without interrupting, his expression calm but his eyes thoughtful. "He's feeling guilty," he said finally. "Guilt can sound a lot like love, but it's not the same thing." I sighed, staring into my tea. "He's still my son." "I know," he said gently, "but you deserve more than crumbs of affection." A few days later, Aaron and Emily called again, this time asking to visit. Against my instincts, I agreed. I suppose some part of me still wanted reconciliation, or maybe I just wanted to see if their tone matched their words. When they arrived, Emily carried a gift bag wrapped in silver paper, her smile too bright, too rehearsed. "Evelyn, it's so beautiful here," she said, her eyes darting around the house like a real estate agent surveying property. At dinner, Aaron kept steering the conversation towards Samuel's business. "You must do well in restoration, Mr. Greene. The real estate market is booming lately, especially near the lake," he said, swirling his wine. Samuel smiled politely. "It's not about profit. It's about rebuilding lives." Aaron nodded, but his eyes told another story, a calculating one. I felt the tension tighten in my chest. I wanted to believe he'd come out of love, not curiosity, but a mother knows. After they left, I found Samuel standing by the fireplace, his jaw tense. "He wasn't here to see you," he said quietly. "He was measuring me and what I have." I didn't argue, because deep down I knew he was right. The storm outside that night wasn't one of wind or rain, but something colder, the ache of realizing that sometimes family returns not because they've changed, but because they've noticed someone else values what they threw away. I thought I'd already survived the hardest storm of my life, but the confrontation that came next would test my heart in ways no tornado ever could. The following week, Samuel told me he had invited Aaron and Emily for dinner again. My stomach dropped. "Why would you do that?" I asked quietly, setting down the cup of tea in my hand. He looked at me with steady, knowing eyes. "Because it's time to stop pretending. You deserve honesty, Evelyn, from everyone." I didn't argue. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to face what I'd been avoiding, that my son and his wife hadn't come for reconciliation, but for curiosity, perhaps even for opportunity. Still, as I set the table that night, my hands trembled. Mothers never stop hoping their children will surprise them. When Aaron and Emily arrived, they looked like they were walking into a business meeting. Aaron in a gray tailored suit, Emily in a sleek black dress, diamonds glinting at her ears. She handed me a neatly wrapped box. "Just a little something," she said with that polished, sugar-sweet tone. "Artisan chocolates, I heard you like sweets." I smiled politely and set it aside. "Thank you." Dinner began in silence. Samuel had made his famous roast beef, the kind that filled the whole house with the smell of rosemary and warmth. We ate slowly, the clinking of forks against plates the only sound for several long minutes. Aaron cleared his throat. "So, Samuel," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you do. Redevelopment sounds fascinating. I actually work in insurance. Perhaps we could explore some ways to collaborate." Samuel looked up from his plate, calm as still water. "I appreciate the offer, Aaron, but I'm not looking to expand right now. My focus is on rebuilding small towns, not portfolios." Aaron's smile faltered. Emily quickly jumped in. "It's just, you two have done so much good work, and this house is incredible. You must be very proud." Her eyes lingered on the antique clock, the chandelier, the view of the lake through the window. I could almost hear her calculating its worth. The tension thickened. I could feel Samuel's restraint like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, he set down his fork and folded his hands on the table. "Evelyn," he said gently, but his gaze stayed fixed on Aaron. "I think there's something that needs to be said, openly." Aaron frowned. "What's this about?" Samuel's voice didn't waver. "It's about how you treated your mother when she lost everything. When she came to you after the storm, needing nothing more than a bed and love, and you turned her away." Aaron's face flushed. I thought it would be better for her to have space. We didn't know how long." "Better for whom?" Samuel interrupted. His tone stayed calm, but there was steel in it now. "For her, or for your convenience?" Emily's smile cracked. "We didn't mean any harm," she said quickly. Samuel cut her off gently. "You meant to make her someone else's problem." The room went silent. I stared at the table, my hands trembling under it. My heart raced, part shame, part anger, part relief. For years, I'd made excuses for my son's coldness, told myself he was busy, tired, misunderstood. But now, as the truth hung in the air, I saw it clearly. I wasn't just ignored, I was discarded. Samuel leaned back, his voice soft but unrelenting. Love isn't about convenience, Aaron. It's about showing up when it's hardest, when someone has nothing left. And when you failed to do that, Evelyn slept in her car, eating crackers and crying herself to sleep. Do you know what that's like for a mother? Aaron looked down. Emily's hands fidgeted with her napkin. I finally spoke, my voice shaking but clear. The night of the tornado, I lost my house, my garden, every photo I ever cherished. But the worst loss wasn't the storm, it was realizing my own son had no room left for me. Aaron's head snapped up, guilt flickering in his eyes. Mom, that's not fair, I stood. Fair, my voice rose, but it wasn't anger anymore, it was release. Do you know what it's like to stand at your child's door and feel unwelcome in the world you helped build for him? To beg for a corner of love and be handed a hotel brochure instead? He said nothing. Emily's lips pressed tight. Samuel placed a comforting hand over mine. Evelyn, you've said enough. Aaron pushed his chair back suddenly. I won't sit here and be lectured, he said, his voice thick with wounded pride. We came to make peace, not to be humiliated. Then you should have come with humility, Samuel replied quietly. They left soon after, the sound of the front door slamming echoing through the house like thunder. I sat back down, my whole body trembling, but for the first time I didn't feel small. I felt free. The storm had passed, but in its wake, something new was building, not destruction, but strength. I thought that dinner would close the chapter on my pain, but what Samuel revealed next would change everything I believed about loss, love, and second chances. The next morning, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, heavy, still, uncertain. I sat by the window, watching the lake shimmer under a pale sky. My heart was tired, but lighter than it had been in years. Samuel walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to me and said softly, "You were brave last night, Evelyn." I gave a small, tired laugh. I don't know if brave is the right word. I just finally told the truth. He smiled. That's all bravery is, saying what your soul has been whispering for too long. For a while, we sat in silence. The wind chimes outside sang their delicate song, and I thought maybe that was the end of it, that the story had finally reached peace. But fate, I've learned, doesn't stop at peace. It tests it. Later that afternoon, I received an email notification on my phone. The sender, Meadowbrook Land Trust Office. My stomach knotted. I opened it slowly, expecting bad news about my old property, maybe more bureaucracy, more loss. But what I read made my hands tremble. Redevelopment project approved. Priority granted to displaced residents. Overseen by Green Restoration and Development. I blinked, reading it twice. Then I turned toward Samuel, who was fixing a loose hinge on the back door. Sam, I said, my voice shaking. Did you know about this? He looked up, calm as always, but there was a flicker of warmth in his eyes. I might have had a hand in it, he said softly. You what? I whispered. You didn't tell me? He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. Evelyn, I didn't want you to think it was charity. My firm won the bid fairly. But when I saw your town on the redevelopment list, I made sure the plan honored the families who lost everything. That includes you. Tears filled my eyes. You mean I can go home? He nodded. You'll have the first right to rebuild. The land is yours, officially protected. No one can take that from you. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My mind flashed back to that night in the basement, the roar, the darkness, the crushing fear that everything was gone forever. And now, here stood the same man who'd once held my hand behind the school gym, promising me a life beyond Meadowbrook, giving me back the one thing I thought I'd never have again, a future. I reached out and touched his arm. You didn't just save me, Sam. You saved who I used to be. He smiled, that same lopsided grin I'd loved 50 years ago. Maybe I just helped her find her way home. That evening, we walked along the lake as the sun dipped low. The light caught in the water, turning everything gold. The breeze carried the scent of pine and memory. I told him how guilty I felt, how torn I was between gratitude and the ache of having lost so much. Samuel stopped and turned to me. Evelyn, he said gently, storms don't just destroy, they reveal. They strip away everything that was false, leaving only what's real. Sometimes, that's the only way we find what truly matters. His words sank deep, the way truth always does. 6 months later, I stood once more on the soil of Meadowbrook. Only this time, the ground wasn't covered in debris. New foundations dotted the streets. Children's laughter echoed where silence once reigned. And at the edge of my lot, a wooden frame marked the start of my new home, one built not on sorrow, but on grace. When I looked up, Samuel was there, watching quietly from the car. His eyes met mine, steady and full of pride. That's when I realized he wasn't just rebuilding homes. He was rebuilding people. And somehow, along the way, he'd rebuilt me. But what I didn't know then was that Samuel had one more surprise waiting, a promise from our youth that he had never truly broken. 6 months later, autumn painted Lake Haven in shades of gold and amber. Samuel's house looked different now, brighter, alive, like it too had begun to heal. I stood in the backyard that morning, watching the leaves drift into the lake, and thought about how strange life can be. One storm had torn everything apart, only for another kind of storm, a quieter, kinder one, to bring it all back together. That afternoon, Samuel asked me to join him outside. I followed him to the garden, where rows of white chairs were arranged in a semicircle overlooking the water. The sight made me stop in my tracks. "What's all this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to me with that soft, patient smile I'd come to know so well. "It's something I've been meaning to ask you for 50 years, he said. My heart stuttered. "Samuel," he took my hands in his palms warm, steady. "Evelyn, when we were 17, I promised I'd build you a home someday. I just never imagined it would take me half a lifetime to keep that promise." His voice trembled with emotion. "You've lost so much, but you've also taught me that love doesn't fade, it just waits for the right time to find its way back." Tears filled my eyes as the autumn wind brushed against us. "Sam, I don't need anything fancy, just you. Just peace," he smiled, eyes glistening. "Then let's make it official." Under the fading afternoon light, a few close friends gathered: Maria, his housekeeper, his business partner Tom, and a local minister who'd known Samuel since college. There was no grand ceremony, no choir, no fuss. Just us, the lake, and the quiet promise that love could bloom even in the twilight years. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, Samuel kissed me softly, not with passion, but with reverence. Like he was sealing a story that had waited far too long for its final chapter. From a distance, I noticed Aaron standing near the fence, alone this time. His face was pale, his eyes glistening with something that looked like shame. When the ceremony ended, he approached slowly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry for everything, for not being there, for forgetting who you are." I reached out, touching his arm. "I forgive you," I whispered. "But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, Aaron. It just means I've stopped carrying it." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I want to do better, I really do." "Then start by loving without conditions," I said softly. "Love me because I'm your mother, not because of what you think I might have." He nodded again, tears streaking his face. For once, he didn't argue. Maybe that was his first real step. That night, Samuel and I sat on the porch as the stars shimmered above the lake. The cool air carried the scent of cedar and new beginnings. I leaned against his shoulder, listening to the rhythmic sound of the waves. "The tornado took my house, my garden, and everything I thought I needed," I said quietly. "But it also cleared the ground for something new. It brought me back to you." Samuel squeezed my hand gently. "Sometimes, destruction is just life's way of making room for what was always meant to be." I smiled through my tears, looking out at the dark horizon. "You were right," I whispered. "Storms don't just take, they reveal." He kissed the top of my head. "And you, Evelyn Carter Greene, are the most beautiful thing that storm ever revealed." As the night deepened, I realized something profound: love doesn't have an age limit. Healing doesn't come with a deadline. And sometimes, when everything you've known is stripped away, what remains is what truly matters. The tornado was never the end of my story. It was the beginning of the one I was always meant to live. Final words from Evelyn, Granny's closing message. "Life will take things from you, homes, people, even pieces of your heart. But what it gives back, if you stay open, is deeper, realer, stronger." So if you're listening to this, remember, you are never too old to rebuild, never too broken to find love again. Welcome to Granny's Stories Vault, where every story is a reminder that life's endings often hide the most beautiful beginnings. Tomorrow, I'll share another story, one that begins not with loss, but with a letter that changed everything.